Ethan had always felt like a nobody. He lived in a small town in Ohio where nothing exciting ever happened. His days were predictable, filled with the same routine over and over again. Every morning he woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and headed to his job at the local library. It wasn't the kind of library you'd see in big cities with grand staircases or towering shelves. This one was small, quiet, and mostly forgotten by everyone except for a few regular visitors who came to borrow books on gardening or cooking. Ethan worked as a janitor there, though he didn't mind the work. Sweeping floors, dusting shelves, and fixing leaky faucets gave him plenty of time to think and to read. The library had an old section in the basement that rarely saw any visitors. That's where Ethan liked to spend his breaks. Rows of forgotten books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded from years of neglect. Most of them were outdated encyclopedias or novels no one cared about anymore. But Ethan loved them. They let him escape into worlds far more interesting than his own. One evening, after most of the staff had left, Ethan decided to clean the basement archives. It wasn't part of his usual duties, but something about the dimly lit room called to him. As he pushed his cart of cleaning supplies down the narrow aisles, he noticed a book sitting slightly apart from the others on a low shelf. Its cover was plain black, almost blending into the shadows around it. Curious, Ethan picked it up. The book felt heavier than it should have, and its surface was cold to the touch. There was no title printed on the front, just faint markings, etched into the leather. At first glance, they looked like random scratches, but when Ethan tilted the book toward the light, he realized they were symbols, strange, swirling patterns that seemed to shift whenever he moved the book. He frowned, wondering if this was some kind of prank or maybe an art project gone wrong. Flipping open the cover, Ethan found pages filled with more of the same symbols. They danced across the paper in chaotic spirals, making his head spin if he stared too long. But then something strange happened. One of the symbols began to glow softly, pulsing with a pale blue light. Startled, Ethan dropped the book onto the floor. The glowing symbol flared brighter, casting eerie shadows against the walls. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the room like a distant engine revving to life. "What the?" Ethan whispered, taking a step back. His heart raced as he watched the light spread, crawling along the edges of the pages until the entire book was bathed in an unnatural glow. Then, without warning, the humming stopped, and the light vanished, leaving the room silent once again. Ethan stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Slowly, he bent down and picked up the book. It felt normal now, neither warm nor heavy. For a moment, he wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing, but deep down, he knew better. Something about that book wasn't right. Deciding not to take any chances, Ethan tucked it under his arm and hurried upstairs. He locked the library doors behind him and drove home faster than usual, glancing nervously at the passenger seat every few seconds. Once inside his apartment, he placed the book on his kitchen table and stared at it. What was he supposed to do with it? Throw it away? Call someone? He didn't even know who to call. Who would believe him? Before he could decide, a wave of dizziness hit him. Ethan staggered, clutching the edge of the table for support. His vision blurred and the room spun around him. Panic surged through his chest as he tried to steady himself, but it was no use. His legs buckled and he collapsed onto the floor. When he woke up, hours had passed. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. Groaning, Ethan sat up and rubbed his temples. His head throbbed and his body ached as if he'd been running a marathon. But aside from that, he seemed fine. The book still lay on the table, looking perfectly ordinary. For the next few days, Ethan tried to put the incident out of his mind. He went about his routine as usual, telling himself it was probably just a trick of the light or some weird electrical phenomenon. But things weren't quite the same anymore. Small changes started happening. Changes he couldn't explain. First, his senses became sharper. He could hear conversations from across the street as clearly as if they were happening. Right next to him, colors appeared brighter and smells stronger. Even food tasted different, like every flavor had been amplified. Then there were the dreams. Vivid, surreal images flooded his sleep each night. He saw forests made of crystal trees, rivers of liquid silver, and skies painted with impossible colors. Sometimes, he dreamed of towering castles floating in the clouds or vast deserts stretching endlessly before him. And always in the background he heard whispers, soft, unintelligible voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize. At first, Ethan thought these changes might be stress-related. Maybe he was working too hard or not getting enough sleep. But as the days turned into weeks, the transformations grew more pronounced. One afternoon, while sweeping the library floor, he accidentally knocked over a stack of books. Instead of bending down to pick them up, he instinctively reached out his hand. To his astonishment, the books lifted off the ground and floated back onto the shelf. Terrified, Ethan backed away, nearly tripping over his mop bucket. Had he really just done that? Was he losing his mind? He spent the rest of the day avoiding people, afraid someone might notice something strange about him. By the time he got home, his nerves were frayed and he couldn't stop thinking about the book. Whatever it was, it had changed him, and not necessarily for the better. Determined to find answers, Ethan returned to the basement the following evening. If the book had caused all this, maybe it held clues about what was happening to him. He searched the shelves where he'd found it, hoping to discover something, anything, that might explain its origins. But the space was empty, as if the book had never belonged there in the first place. Frustrated, Ethan slumped against the wall. "What are you doing to me?" he muttered under his breath, glaring at the book lying on the floor beside him. No response came, only silence. Yet somehow Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the book was alive, watching him, waiting. Over the next week, Ethan's world continued to shift in ways he couldn't control. Objects moved when he focused on them. Lights flickered when he walked past. And those whispers, he heard them even when he was awake now, faint murmurs that followed him wherever he went. Each day brought new challenges, forcing him to adapt to his rapidly changing reality. But Ethan wasn't alone for long. One rainy afternoon, while grabbing a cup of coffee at the shop near the library, he met Claire. She was younger than him, with sharp green eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. They struck up a conversation, and before he knew it, Ethan found himself confiding in her about the book and the bizarre events surrounding it. To his surprise, Claire didn't laugh or dismiss him as crazy. Instead, she leaned forward, her expression serious. "You're not the only one," she said quietly. "I've been seeing things too." And just like that, Ethan's journey took a turn. Together, they vowed to uncover the truth about the mysterious book and the powers it had unleashed. Little did they know their adventure was only beginning. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Claire's words hung in the air between them, heavy and unsettling. "What do you mean I'm not the only one?" he asked, his voice low, so the other customers in the coffee shop wouldn't overhear. Claire glanced around cautiously before leaning closer. Her green eyes were sharp, like she was trying to decide how much to trust him. Finally, she sighed and said, "I've been seeing things for months now, shadows moving when they shouldn't, lights flickering out of nowhere. And sometimes," she hesitated, then added, "sometimes I hear voices too." Ethan stared at her, unsure whether to feel relieved or even more terrified. On one hand, it was comforting to know he wasn't losing his mind. On the other hand, if Claire was experiencing similar phenomena, that meant whatever was happening wasn't just about him. It was bigger, much bigger. "Do you think it has something to do with this?" Ethan whispered, pulling the black book out of his bag. He'd brought it along almost without thinking, as if it had become a part of him now. Claire's eyes widened when she saw it. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against its surface. "This is it," she murmured. "This is the source, isn't it?" "How do you know?" Ethan asked, startled by her certainty. "I don't know," Claire admitted, pulling her hand back quickly. "But I've seen symbols like those before, in my dreams." She looked up at him, her expression serious. "They're not random. They mean something. Something important." The two of them sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery sinking in. Neither of them fully understood what was going on, but they both knew they couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever the book was, it had changed them, and it wasn't done yet. Over the next few days, Ethan and Claire began meeting regularly to figure things out. They started small, scouring the internet for information about ancient texts, magical artifacts, and anything else that might explain the book's origins. Most of what they found was useless, a mix of conspiracy theories and fake stories, but some pieces stood out. Tales of interdimensional portals, hidden societies, and realms beyond human understanding kept popping up again and again. Claire suggested they visit the local history museum, hoping to find clues in old records or artifacts. The museum was small and dusty, tucked away on the edge of town. Its curator, an elderly man named Harold, greeted them warmly when they arrived. He seemed surprised to see visitors, especially ones asking questions about obscure legends. "You're looking for myths about crossing worlds, you say?" Harold repeated, stroking his gray beard thoughtfully. "Well, I suppose there are a few stories. Mostly nonsense, mind you, but people love a good tale." He led them to a display case filled with old manuscripts and trinkets. One item caught Ethan's eye immediately. A faded map covered in strange markings that looked eerily similar to the symbols in the book. Claire noticed it too and leaned in closer. "What's this?" she asked, pointing to the map. Harold chuckled. "That's called the Veil Map. Supposedly it shows pathways between our world and, well, others. Of course, no one really believes it exists outside of folklore." Ethan exchanged a glance with Claire. Could this be connected to the book? Before they could ask more questions, Harold excused himself to help another visitor, leaving them alone with the exhibit. "We need to look into this further," Claire whispered, her excitement barely contained. "If these maps are real, maybe they can tell us where the book came from, or where it leads." Back at Ethan's apartment, they spread out their findings on the kitchen table. The map, which they'd managed to photograph discreetly, was full of intricate details. Some parts looked like constellations, while others resembled twisting rivers or jagged mountain ranges. Claire traced her finger over one section, frowning. "These lines here, they match the symbols in the book," she said. "It's like the map is a guide for using it." Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought. Using the book felt dangerous, like poking a sleeping beast. Still, they didn't have much choice. If they wanted answers, they had to take risks. As they studied the map, something strange happened. The book, which had been sitting quietly on the table, suddenly pulsed with warmth. Startled, Ethan grabbed it, but instead of glowing like before, it vibrated faintly, as if alive. Then, without warning, the symbols on its pages began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. "It's responding to the map," Claire exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. Before either of them could react, the room grew darker, the lights dimming as if someone had turned off the power. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. Ethan and Claire clung to each other, unsure of what was happening. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights returned to normal and the hum faded away. But the book was different now. Its cover shimmered faintly and the symbols glowed softly, as if urging them to open it. "What do we do?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Ethan swallowed hard. "We follow it," he said finally. "Whatever this thing wants, it's leading us somewhere. Maybe we'll find answers on the other side." Opening the book felt like stepping into a dream. The moment Ethan flipped to the first page, the room dissolved around them. Colors swirled and shifted, blending together in a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. For a brief second, Ethan thought he might pass out again, but then the chaos settled, revealing a breathtaking sight. They were standing in a vast otherworldly landscape. The sky above them was painted with hues of gold and violet, streaked with clouds that sparkled like diamonds. Towering trees made of crystal stretched toward the heavens, their branches chiming softly in an invisible breeze. In the distance, a city floated mid-air, its buildings interconnected by bridges of light. Ethan and Claire stood frozen, overwhelmed by the beauty and strangeness of it all. Where are we? Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Ethan replied, his heart pounding. But I think we just crossed the veil. As they took their first steps forward, they realized they weren't alone. Figures moved in the distance, humanoid shapes but not quite human. Some had wings, others glowed faintly, their forms shimmering like mirages. None of them paid any attention to Ethan and Claire, as if the newcomers were invisible. This place is incredible, Claire said, her fear giving way to awe. But we can't stay here forever. We need to find someone who knows what's going on. Ethan agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every step they took seemed to echo unnaturally, and the whispers he'd heard before were louder now, swirling around them like a chorus of ghosts. Eventually, they reached the edge of a clearing where a lone figure stood waiting. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in armor that gleamed like polished silver. His face was weathered, marked by scars and years of hardship, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "I am Gabriel. You've entered the realm of infinite realms, a place where fantasy and reality collide." Ethan and Claire exchanged a glance, unsure of how to respond. "How do you know who we are?" Ethan asked cautiously. Gabriel smiled faintly. "Because you carry the Codex," he said, gesturing toward the book still clutched in Ethan's hands. "Few mortals have ever wielded its power. Fewer still have survived its trials." "Trials?" Claire repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What kind of trials?" Gabriel's expression darkened. "The Codex is a tool of creation and destruction. It binds the realms together, maintaining balance. But it also attracts those who seek to exploit its power. You must learn to control it, or risk unleashing chaos upon both your world and ours." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Why us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did it choose us?" Gabriel studied him for a long moment, his gaze piercing. "Perhaps because you are more than you appear, Ethan. And perhaps because time is running out." Over the next several hours, Gabriel explained the basics of the Codex and the delicate balance it maintained. According to him, rogue factions had been trying to merge the realms permanently, believing it would grant them ultimate power. But such an act would destroy countless lives, collapsing entire dimensions into ruin. "You have a role to play in stopping them," Gabriel told Ethan and Claire. "But beware, your presence here has already drawn their attention. They will come for you." Despite Gabriel's warnings, Ethan and Claire couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. For the first time, they weren't wandering blindly. They had a purpose, however daunting it might be. As they prepared to leave the realm and return home, Gabriel handed them a small, glowing crystal. "Take this," he said. "It will guide you back if you get lost. And remember, the Codex responds to your will. Use it wisely." With that, he disappeared into the shimmering horizon, leaving Ethan and Claire alone once more. Hand in hand, they stepped through the portal, returning to their familiar world. But nothing felt the same anymore. The ordinary streets and buildings seemed dull compared to the wonders they'd witnessed. "We can't go back to normal after this," Claire said, breaking the silence. "Can we?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we were never meant to." Little did they know, their journey was only beginning. The Codex had awakened something within them, and the battle for the fate of two worlds was about to begin. When Ethan and Claire stepped back into their world, everything felt heavier. The air smelled stale, the colors seemed dull, and the weight of what they'd just experienced pressed down on them like a storm cloud. They were no longer just two ordinary people trying to make sense of strange events. They were travelers between worlds, carrying a responsibility far greater than either of them had imagined. The crystal Gabriel had given them pulsed faintly. In Claire's hand, its soft glow a reminder that they weren't alone. But even with it, neither of them felt safe. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder, as if the world itself was watching them. They knew the rogue factions Gabriel had warned them about wouldn't wait long before coming after them. And the codex. We need to practice, Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence as they walked through the empty streets of their small town. If we're going to use this thing, we have to get better at controlling it. Claire nodded, though her face was pale. I agree, but where do we even start? We can't exactly go to the library basement and wave the book around hoping for the best. Ethan stopped walking and turned to her. What about the woods? There's that old trail near my apartment. Hardly anyone goes there anymore. If something happens, at least we won't draw attention. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all they had. Together they made their way to the edge of the forest, the cool night air biting at their skin. The trees loomed above them, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the moonlit sky. Ethan clutched the codex tightly, his knuckles white, while Claire held the glowing crystal close to her chest. The first attempt was clumsy. Ethan opened the book, flipping to a random page filled with shifting symbols. He focused on one particular pattern, trying to channel the energy he'd felt before. At first, nothing happened. Frustrated, he closed his eyes and concentrated harder, imagining the power flowing through him like water. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A gust of wind swept through the trees, knocking leaves loose and sending them swirling into the air. Claire stumbled back, shielding her face as the wind grew stronger. When Ethan opened his eyes, he saw a shimmering orb hovering in front of him, pulsating with light. "Ethan!" Claire shouted over the noise. "You did it!" But the excitement didn't last long. The orb began to expand, growing larger and brighter until it threatened to engulf them both. Panicking, Ethan tried to pull the energy back, but it slipped out of his control. With a deafening crack, the orb exploded, sending shockwaves rippling through the forest. When the dust settled, Ethan sank to his knees, breathing heavily. His hands were shaking and sweat dripped down his forehead. Claire rushed to his side, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" I think so," Ethan replied, though his voice was weak. "But that was dangerous." Claire frowned, glancing at the damaged trees around them. "Yeah, no kidding. If you lose control like that again, we might not survive." They decided to take a break, sitting on a fallen log while they caught their breath. The crystal in Claire's hand dimmed slightly, as if reacting to their exhaustion. Ethan stared at the codex, frustration bubbling inside him. "How am I supposed to protect us if I can't even control this stupid thing?" he muttered. "You will," Claire said firmly. "We'll figure it out together. Just maybe try something smaller next time." Encouraged by her words, Ethan nodded. They spent the rest of the night practicing, starting with simpler tasks. By the time the sun began to rise, Ethan could summon small bursts of light without losing control. Claire discovered she had her own abilities too. When she focused on the crystal, it responded to her thoughts, creating barriers of shimmering energy that blocked falling branches or stray rocks. Though progress was slow, they were learning, and each success brought a little more confidence. A few days later, they returned to the woods, determined to push themselves further. This time, Ethan wanted to test the codex's connection to the map they'd found earlier. He spread the photo of the Veil map on the ground and placed the book beside it. As soon as the symbols aligned, the air around them shifted. The forest seemed to fade away, replaced by a swirling void of color and light. "It's opening a portal," Claire whispered. Clutching the crystal tightly, Ethan hesitated, unsure whether they should step through. But curiosity outweighed caution. Taking a deep breath, he reached out and grabbed Claire's hand. Together they stepped forward, leaving their world behind once more. This time, the realm they entered was different. Instead of the crystalline beauty of the previous place, they found themselves in a desolate wasteland. The ground was cracked and dry, littered with ruins of ancient structures. A red sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. "This doesn't look good," Claire murmured, scanning their surroundings nervously. Before they could decide what to do, a group of figures emerged from the ruins. Unlike the beings they'd seen before, these creatures were grotesque, twisted amalgamations of human and animal features. Their eyes glowed with malice and they moved with unnatural speed. "They're here for the codex," Ethan realized, his voice tight with fear. Without hesitation, Claire raised the crystal, forming a protective barrier around them. The creatures snarled, pounding against the shimmering wall but unable to break through. Ethan flipped open the book, searching for a symbol that might help them escape. "Hurry," Claire urged, her strength visibly waning as the barrier flickered. Ethan's fingers traced over the pages frantically until he found a familiar pattern, the same one that had created the orb during their first practice session. Summoning all his focus, he channeled the energy into the symbol. This time, instead of chaos, a beam of light shot outward, striking the nearest creature and disintegrating it instantly. The others recoiled, hissing in anger. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan grabbed Claire's hand again and ran toward the nearest ruin. Behind them, the creatures gave chase, their claws scraping against the rocky terrain. "We need to find another portal," Claire shouted, dodging debris as they sprinted through the crumbling structures. Ethan nodded, clutching the book tightly. He could feel the codex responding to his desperation, its symbols glowing brighter with each step. Finally, they reached a massive archway carved into the side of a cliff. It pulsed with faint energy similar to the crystal in Claire's hand. "That has to be it," Ethan exclaimed. They sprinted toward the archway, the creatures closing in behind them. Just as the first monster lunged, Claire threw up a final burst of energy, knocking it back. Together they leaped through the portal, the world dissolving around them once more. When they landed, they were back in the floating city they'd visited with Gabriel. The golden skies and chiming trees greeted them like old friends, offering a brief moment of relief. But their respite was short-lived. Gabriel appeared moments later, his expression grim. "You've attracted too much attention," he said without preamble. "The rogues know you're here now. You must leave immediately." "But we don't know how to fight them," Ethan protested. "We barely escaped last time." Gabriel's gaze softened slightly. "Then you must learn quickly. Stay here tonight, I'll teach you what I can. But tomorrow you must return to your world. The battle is coming, whether you're ready or not." As the sun set over the floating city, Ethan and Claire trained under Gabriel's guidance. He taught them how to harness the Codex's power more effectively, showing them techniques to defend themselves and counterattack. Claire learned to manipulate the crystal's energy, creating weapons of light that could cut through even the toughest defenses. Ethan practiced focusing his abilities, channel her self-control to avoid accidents. By dawn, they were exhausted, but more prepared than they'd ever been. As they prepared to leave, Gabriel handed them another item, a small vial filled with liquid that shimmered like stardust. "Drink this if you're ever overwhelmed," he instructed. "It will restore your strength temporarily, but use it wisely. It comes at a cost." With heavy hearts, Ethan and Claire stepped through the portal once more, returning to their world. The journey ahead would be perilous, but they were no longer helpless. Together, they vowed to stand against the forces threatening to destroy both their world and the realms beyond. Little did they know, the true test of their resolve was closer than they thought. Ethan and Claire returned to their world with a newfound sense of purpose, but also an overwhelming awareness of the danger surrounding them. The vial Gabriel had given them sat safely in Ethan's pocket, its shimmering contents a constant reminder of the stakes they were up against. They knew they couldn't afford to waste time. Every moment they spent idle was another moment the rogue factions could use to hunt them down, or worse, unleash chaos upon both worlds. Their first task was to find a safe place to practice. The woods near Ethan's apartment, while secluded, no longer felt secure enough. The memory of the creatures chasing them through the desolate wasteland lingered in their minds, haunting them like shadows. Claire suggested they look for somewhere more remote, a place where no one would stumble across them by accident. After some discussion, they decided on an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a crumbling structure, long forgotten by the townsfolk, with broken windows and rusted metal doors. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decay, but it offered plenty of space for them to train without attracting attention. The days that followed were grueling. Ethan and Claire pushed themselves harder than ever before, determined to master the powers they'd been given. Each morning they arrived at the warehouse as the sun rose, carrying supplies and the codex. They worked tirelessly, practicing, until their bodies ached and their minds felt numb. For Ethan, controlling the codex was still a struggle. He could summon bursts of energy and create shields, but precision eluded him. More than once his attempts ended in disaster. Walls cracked, beams collapsed, and debris scattered across the floor. Frustration gnawed at him, making it even harder to focus. "You're trying too hard," Claire said one afternoon, watching him pace back and forth. "You can't force it, Ethan. It's not just about power, it's about balance." "But how do I find that balance?" Ethan snapped, running a hand through his hair. "Every time I try, something goes wrong." Claire stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "Close your eyes, breathe. Feel the energy inside you instead of fighting it. Trust yourself." Reluctantly, Ethan did as she said. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the codex guide him. Slowly, he began to feel it, not as a foreign force, but as an extension of himself. When he opened his eyes again, the symbols on the pages glowed steadily, responding to his calmness. "Now try," Claire encouraged. This time, when Ethan reached out with the codex, the result was different. A sphere of light formed in front of him, steady and controlled. It hovered silently, casting soft illumination across the room. Ethan stared at it in disbelief, then turned to Claire with a grin. "I did it," he said, his voice filled with, "Aw, you did?" Claire replied, smiling back. "See? You just needed to trust yourself." While Ethan worked on mastering the codex, Claire focused on honing her abilities with the crystal. She discovered that it responded not only to her thoughts but also to her emotions. Fear made it flicker, anger caused it to burn brightly, and determination gave it strength. Over time, she learned to channel those emotions into practical uses, creating barriers strong enough to withstand powerful attacks or crafting weapons capable of cutting through solid steel. One evening, after hours of training, Claire sat cross-legged on the floor, holding the crystal in her lap. She closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth it radiated. Suddenly, images flashed in her mind, visions of towering figures cloaked in darkness, their faces obscured by hoods. They stood in a cavernous hall surrounded by glowing artifacts similar to the codex. In the center of the room was a massive portal, pulsating with chaotic energy. Claire gasped, snapping out of the vision. Her heart raced as she looked around, the empty warehouse, half expecting the figures to appear before her. Instead, she found Ethan staring at her, concern etched on his face. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I saw them," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "The rogues. They're planning something big, a ritual to merge the realms permanently." Ethan's expression darkened. "Do you know where they are?" Claire shook her head. "Not exactly, but I think the crystal showed me their base. If we can figure out how to follow the vision, maybe we can stop them." The next day they devised a plan. Using the map and the crystal, they hoped to pinpoint the location of the rogues' stronghold. Claire focused on the images from her vision while Ethan traced the symbols in the codex, searching for connections. Hours passed, but finally the crystal began to glow brighter, pointing toward a specific spot on the map. "It's underground," Claire said, tracing her finger over the area. "Somewhere beneath the old quarry outside of town." Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned with unease. "That makes sense. It's isolated, easy to hide." "We need to check it out," Claire insisted. "If they're really planning to merge the realms, we can't wait." They agreed to scout the area that night, hoping to gather more information before taking any drastic action. As the sun set, they packed their supplies and headed toward the quarry, moving cautiously through the dense forest that surrounded it. When they arrived, the landscape was eerily quiet. The quarry itself was a jagged scar in the earth, its walls steep and rocky. At the bottom, pools of water reflected the moonlight, casting silvery ripples across the surface. But it wasn't the quarry that caught their attention. It was the faint hum coming from deep below ground. "There's something down there," Ethan murmured, crouching behind a cluster of rocks. Claire nodded, clutching the crystal tightly. I can feel it too. Whatever it is, it's connected to the codex. They crept closer, careful to stay hidden. At the edge of the quarry, they discovered a narrow tunnel leading downward, partially concealed by fallen boulders. The hum grew louder as they approached, vibrating through the soles of their shoes. This has to be it, Claire whispered. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the dark forest behind them. Are you sure about this? We don't even know what's waiting for us down there. We don't have a choice, Claire replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. If we don't stop them now, it might be too late. Taking a deep breath, Ethan nodded. Together, they descended into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The walls of the tunnel glistened, with moisture and strange carvings covered the stone surfaces, symbols that matched those in the codex. Claire's crystal pulsed faintly, lighting their way as they moved further into the earth. Finally, they reached a large chamber. The sight that greeted them took their breath away. The room was filled with glowing artifacts, each one radiating a different color. In the center stood the massive portal Claire had seen in her vision, its surface swirling with chaotic energy. Around it, hooded figures chanted in unison, their voices echoing off the walls. Ethan and Claire froze, realizing they weren't alone. Before they could retreat, one of the figures turned, sensing their presence. Its hood fell back, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes that glowed with malice. Intruders, it hissed, raising a staff adorned with jagged crystals. Kill them. The other figures turned, advancing toward them with weapons drawn. Panic surged through Ethan and Claire, but they didn't run. Instead, they stood their ground, ready to fight. Ethan flipped open the codex, summoning a shield of light to block the first wave of attacks. Claire raised the crystal, forming a barrier around them. Together, they fought back, using everything they'd learned in their training. Beams of energy shot from the codex, striking their enemies with precision. The crystal unleashed bursts of radiant light, forcing the figures to retreat. But the battle was far from over. The leader of the rogues stepped forward, wielding a weapon, unlike anything they'd seen before, a blade forged from pure shadow. It cut through their defenses effortlessly, sending shockwaves rippling through the chamber. We can't hold them off forever, Claire shouted, dodging another attack. Ethan's mind raced. He remembered the vial Gabriel had given them and quickly pulled it from his pocket. Without hesitation, he drank the shimmering liquid. Instantly, strength surged through him, banishing his fatigue and sharpening his focus. With renewed determination, Ethan charged forward, the codex blazing in his hands. He unleashed a torrent of energy, driving the rogues back. Claire joined him, her crystal glowing brighter than ever as she unleashed a final burst of power. The combined assault shattered the portal, causing the entire chamber to tremble. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, forcing the rogues to flee. Ethan and Claire didn't wait. They ran as fast as they could, escaping the collapsing cavern just moments before it imploded behind them. As they emerged into the cool night air, exhaustion hit them like a tidal wave. They collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily as the adrenaline faded. For now, they had stopped the rogues, but they knew this victory was only temporary. They'll regroup, Claire said softly, staring up at the stars, and next time they'll be stronger. Ethan nodded, clutching the codex tightly. Then we'll be ready. Despite the uncertainty ahead, they shared a small smile. They had faced death and emerged victorious, not because they were heroes, but because they refused to give up. Whatever challenges lay in their path, they would face them together. Ethan and Claire didn't have much time to rest after their narrow escape from the quarry. The adrenaline that had kept them going during the battle faded quickly, leaving them drained and sore. But even as they lay on the grass, catching their breath, they knew the danger wasn't over. The rogues might have been forced to retreat, but their plans were far from ruined, and Ethan and Claire couldn't afford to let their guard down. We need to move, Claire said finally, sitting up and brushing dirt off her hands. If any of them survived, they'll come looking for us. Ethan nodded, though his body protested at the thought of moving. His muscles ached and his head throbbed from the strain of using the codex. Still, he forced himself to stand, clutching the book tightly. Where do we go? We can't stay here. Claire glanced around, her sharp eyes scanning the dark forest surrounding them. We need somewhere safe, a place we can regroup and figure out our next step. Somewhere they won't find us. After a moment of thought, Ethan suggested heading back to the abandoned warehouse. It wasn't perfect, but it was secluded, and they'd already set it up as a training ground. For now, it would have to do. The walk back felt like an eternity. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made them jump, convinced they were being followed. By the time they reached the warehouse, both of them were on edge, their nerves stretched thin. Inside, they barricaded the doors and windows with whatever they could find: old crates, broken furniture, anything to slow down anyone, or anything that might try to break in. Once they were as secure as possible, they collapsed onto the floor, too exhausted to do much else. Claire pulled the crystal close, its faint glow providing some comfort in the darkness. Ethan opened the codex, studying its pages intently. He was searching for answers, for clues about what the rogues were planning and how to stop them. But the symbols seemed to mock him, shifting and rearranging themselves in ways he couldn't decipher. "We're not ready for this," Ethan muttered, frustration seeping into his voice. "Every time we face them, it's just luck that keeps us alive. What happens when our luck runs out?" Claire turned to him, her expression softening. "Luck has nothing to do with it. We're still here because we don't give up. That's why we've made it this far." "But how much longer can we keep going like this?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "We're just two people. How are we supposed to fight an entire faction of whatever they are?" Claire hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She wanted to reassure him, but deep down, she shared his fears. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of options. Still, she refused to let despair take hold. "One step at a time," she said finally. "That's all we can do. Right now, we need to focus on surviving tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." As dawn broke, Ethan and Claire began to piece together a plan. They knew they couldn't face the rogues alone, not without help. Gabriel had warned them about the stakes, but he hadn't offered much guidance beyond that. If they were going to stand a chance, they needed allies, people who understood the realms and the dangers they posed. But finding such allies wouldn't be easy. Most people would dismiss their story as madness, and those who believed them might still refuse to get involved. The risk was too great. Still, Ethan and Claire decided it was worth a shot. Their first stop would be Harold, the elderly curator from the local history museum. He'd shown interest in the legends surrounding the codex before, and maybe, just maybe, he knew someone who could help. When they arrived at the museum, Harold greeted them warmly, though his smile faltered slightly when he saw the seriousness in their expressions. "Back so soon?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I assume this isn't a social visit." "No, it's not," Ethan admitted, pulling the codex from his bag. "We need your help." Harold's eyes widened as he recognized the book. "You've been using it," he said, his voice low. "What have you done?" "It's not what we've done. It's what others are trying to do," Claire interjected. "There's a group, rogues, who want to merge the realms. If they succeed, it'll destroy everything." Harold's face paled, and he sank into a nearby chair. For a long moment, he said nothing, staring at the codex as if it might leap off the table and attack him. Finally, he sighed deeply. "You've stumbled into something far bigger than you realize. These rogues, they're not just ordinary people. They're part of an ancient order, bent on reshaping reality to suit their desires." "Then you know how dangerous they are," Ethan said urgently. "We need someone who understands this world, who can teach us how to fight them." Harold hesitated, clearly torn. Whatever secrets he held, they weighed heavily on him. "There is someone," he said finally. "A woman named Eleanor. She's one of the last true scholars of the realms. If anyone can help you, it's her." "Where can we find her?" Claire asked, leaning forward. Harold frowned. "She lives in solitude, far from prying eyes. Getting to her won't be easy, and convincing her to help you will be even harder. But if you're serious about stopping the rogues, She's your best hope." He scribbled an address on a scrap of paper and handed it to them. "Be careful, and remember, one wrong move and you'll have more than the rogues to worry about." The journey to Eleanor's home took them deep into the countryside, where the roads became narrow and overgrown. Her house was tucked away in a remote valley, surrounded by dense woods and misty hills. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, an old stone cottage with ivy climbing its walls and smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Ethan knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing a tall, elegant woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She studied them silently, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "You must be Ethan and Claire," she said finally, her voice calm but commanding. "Harold sent you, didn't he?" "Yes," Claire replied, stepping forward. "We need your help. The rogues, they're planning to merge the realms. We don't know how to stop them." Eleanor's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Come inside," she said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. Her home was warm and inviting, filled with books, maps, and strange artifacts. She gestured for them to sit, then poured 3 cups of tea. "Tell me everything," she instructed, settling into a chair across from them. For the next hour, Ethan and Claire recounted their story, the discovery of the Codex, their encounters with the rogues, and the battles they'd fought. Eleanor listened intently, asking questions only when necessary. When they finished, she leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "You've done well to survive this long," she said finally. "But you're right, you can't face them alone. Their leader Malachar is ruthless and cunning. He won't stop until he achieves his goal." "Then what do we do?" Ethan asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Eleanor stood and walked to a large map pinned to the wall. She traced her finger along a jagged line, marking a location deep within the mountains. "There's a fortress hidden here, a stronghold of the Weavers, the guardians of the realms. If you can reach it, you may find allies willing to help you." "But how do we get there?" Claire asked. "It's not like we can just walk in." "No," Eleanor agreed. "The path is treacherous, guarded by creatures born of chaos. But I can give you tools to aid your journey." She retrieved a small pouch from a shelf and handed it to them. Inside were vials of shimmering liquid, similar to the one Gabriel had given them, along with a rolled-up parchment covered in intricate runes. "These potions will restore your strength when you need it most," she explained. "And this map will guide you through the mountain passes. But beware. Once you leave this house, there's no turning back. The rogues will sense your presence, and they'll come for you." Ethan and Claire exchanged a glance, their resolve hardening. "We're ready," Ethan said firmly. Eleanor nodded, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "Then go, and may the realms protect you." The journey to the fortress tested them in ways they hadn't anticipated. The mountains were brutal, their paths steep and icy. Strange creatures stalked them, their glowing eyes watching from the shadows. More than once they had to use the Codex and the crystal to fend off attacks, draining their energy and pushing them to their limits. But despite the hardships, they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Each step brought them closer to their goal, and closer to the final confrontation with Malachar. Finally, after days of travel, they reached the fortress. It loomed above them, carved into the side of a cliff, its spires reaching toward the sky. As they approached, the gates creaked open, revealing a group of figures clad in flowing robes. "The Weavers," Claire whispered, awe in her voice. One of them stepped forward, a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Welcome," he said. "We've been expecting you." Ethan and Claire exchanged a surprised glance. "Expecting us?" Ethan repeated. The man nodded. "Your arrival was foretold. You are the chosen ones, the ones destined to restore balance between the realms." Before they could respond, a loud crash echoed through the valley. Turning, they saw a column of smoke rising in the distance. The rogues had found them. "There's no time to waste," the Weaver said urgently. "Prepare yourselves. The final battle begins now." With heavy hearts but unwavering determination, Ethan and Claire followed the Weavers into the fortress, knowing that the fate of two worlds rested on their shoulders. The fortress of the Weavers was a place unlike anything Ethan and Claire had ever seen. Its halls were lined with glowing runes that pulsed softly, casting an otherworldly light over everything. Strange artifacts floated in glass cases along the walls, crystals that hummed faintly, weapons forged from shimmering metal, and maps that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The air inside was cool and still, filled with a sense of ancient power. The Weaver who had greeted them led them deeper into the fortress, explaining what lay ahead. "Malachar knows you're here," he said gravely. "He will come for the Codex, believing it holds the key to merging the realms. If he succeeds, both worlds will collapse under the strain." Ethan tightened his grip on the Codex, feeling its weight in his hands. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "You must stand against him," the Weaver replied. "But you won't face him alone. The Weavers will fight alongside you, protecting the balance between the realms. However, the final battle will fall to you two. Only the chosen ones can wield the Codex's full potential." Claire nodded, though her expression was grim. She clutched the crystal tightly, drawing strength from its warmth. "Tell us what we need to know," she said firmly. For the next several hours, the Weavers trained Ethan and Claire, teaching them how to harness their powers more effectively. They practiced in a large chamber filled with floating platforms, each one requiring precise control to navigate. The exercises were grueling, pushing them to their limits, but they refused to give up. Every failure brought them closer to mastery. Every success fueled their determination. Ethan learned to channel the Codex's energy not just for attacks, but for defense and healing as well. He discovered that focusing on specific symbols allowed him to create barriers strong enough to withstand even the most powerful assaults. Claire, meanwhile, mastered the art of shaping the crystal's energy into intricate forms, weapons, shields, and even traps designed to immobilize their enemies. The hours passed. They began to feel a connection, not just to their powers but to each other. Their movements became synchronized, their thoughts aligned. It was as if the Codex and the crystal were speaking to them, guiding them toward a shared purpose. But time was running out. Outside the fortress, the skies darkened as storm clouds gathered. Lightning crackled across the horizon, illuminating the jagged peaks of the mountains. The rogues were closing in. When the attack came, it was sudden and overwhelming. The ground shook violently as the fortress gates shattered, sending debris flying in all directions. Malachar himself led the charge, his towering figure clad in black armor etched with glowing red runes. His eyes burned with malice, and in his hand he carried a massive blade forged from shadow. "Hand over the Codex," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the valley, "or face annihilation." The Weavers formed a protective line in front of Ethan and Claire, their robes billowing as they summoned weapons of light. Battle erupted instantly, the clash of steel and magic filling the air. Beams of energy shot across the battlefield, striking down rogue warriors while others retaliated with chaotic spells. Ethan and Claire stayed close together, using the training they'd received to hold their ground. Ethan unleashed bursts of energy from the Codex, driving back waves of enemies. Claire created barriers with the crystal, shielding them from incoming attacks. But no matter how many rogues they defeated, more kept coming. "They're too many," Claire shouted, her voice strained from exertion. "We can't stop now," Ethan replied, summoning another wave of energy. "We have to reach Malachar." Through sheer force of will, they pushed forward, fighting their way toward the rogue leader. Malachar watched them approach, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "So the chosen ones dare to challenge me," he sneered. "Let's see if you're truly worthy." With a roar, he swung his shadow blade, unleashing a torrent of darkness that surged toward them. Ethan quickly raised a barrier, but the force of the impact nearly knocked him off his feet. Claire countered with a blast of radiant energy, forcing Malachar to stagger back. The duel that followed was intense and relentless. Malachar was a formidable opponent, his strength and speed unmatched. Every strike of his blade sent shockwaves rippling through the air, threatening to overwhelm them. But Ethan and Claire fought with everything they had, their combined powers creating a dazzling display of light and energy. At one point, Malachar managed to knock the codex from Ethan's hands, sending it skittering across the ground. Panic surged through Ethan as he scrambled to retrieve it, but Malachar blocked his path, raising his blade for a killing blow. Just as he swung, Claire stepped in front of Ethan, using the crystal to form a shield that deflected the attack. "Claire!" Ethan shouted, horrified. "I'm fine," she gasped, though her legs wobbled beneath her. "Get the codex." Summoning every ounce of strength, Ethan lunged for the book, grabbing it just as Malachar turned his attention back to them. With a primal shout, Ethan flipped open the codex, focusing on a symbol he hadn't dared to use before, a swirling pattern that seemed to pulse with raw power. "This is it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It has to be." Channeling all his focus, Ethan unleashed the symbol's energy, creating a vortex of light that engulfed Malachar. The rogue leader screamed in rage, his shadow blade dissolving into nothingness as the vortex consumed him. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, with a deafening explosion, the vortex collapsed, leaving only emptiness where Malachar had stood. The remaining rogues fled, their morale shattered without their leader. Exhausted but victorious, Ethan and Claire sank to their knees, breathing heavily. Around them, the weavers lowered their weapons, relief washing over their faces. "It's over," Claire murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We did it." But Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he stared at the codex in his hands, its symbols fading one by one until the pages were blank. A deep sadness settled over him as he realized what this meant. The codex had fulfilled its purpose. It could no longer be used. "What happens now?" Claire asked softly, noticing the look on his face. "The realms are safe," Ethan replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I don't think we'll ever go back to the way things were." Claire reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe that's okay. We've changed, Ethan. Both of us. And maybe that's not such a bad thing." As the sun rose over the mountains, casting golden light across the battlefield, Ethan and Claire stood together, ready to face whatever came next. Though the journey had cost them dearly, they knew they had made a difference. Together, they had saved two worlds, and in doing so they had found something far more valuable than power or glory. They had found each other.